Okay, so we're back. I am pleased to announce our next speaker, Joe Cummins, who is given the 5th talk of today. Joe has been involved in the EFL world for over 14 years. She has taught in Ecuador, the UK and Australia. She currently works as a freelance materials writer and occasional teacher in the UK, where she specializes in writing materials for teenagers and adults. Over to you, Joe.
Thank you, Maria. So thank you to YLTSIG for having me today to talk to you about project-based learning, and I'm particularly going to be focusing on doing project-based learning at lower secondary level, by which I mean roughly between 11 and 14-year-olds. So as a rough guideline, that's what I'll be focusing on, although obviously many of the principles and many of the ideas will work for younger or older students with some adaptations. So I think using project-based learning for this kind of age group isn't really anything new, and in my experience in schools that I've worked in, this is something that teachers use quite a lot because it's successful with students of this age because they enjoy it. But also in my experience, it's often something that's used as kind of supplementary or secondary to the sort of main serious learning. So today I kind of wanted to argue that we can make it more of an integral part of lower secondary courses, and we can use it for some more kind of meaty language learning as opposed to just a bit of light relief. So I wanted to start by just being really clear about what I mean when I talk about project-based learning, and I think it is closely related to what we would call task-based learning, and I sort of think of it as being a big sister or a big brother to task-based learning. So I was wondering if we could start first of all by maybe using the chat box, if you could tell me what you think the main differences are between task-based learning and project-based learning. So I was wondering if you could just type down your ideas of what you think, how are they different, task-based learning and project-based learning, if anyone has any ideas they would like to share with me. Anybody? Okay, yep, so project-based learning has many components, yep. Anything else? Any other differences? A few people typing, I'll just give you a minute. Okay, yep. Adam is very true. So she says project-based takes few classes to finish and task-based can be done in a class. Project-based learning works on developing student skills. Yeah, I mean, I think sometimes task-based learning can do that as well, but yeah, I know what you mean. We're talking about skills. Okay, I'll just show you what I've put down, and there obviously might be other ideas that you could put along on this. So both develop real life skills, students engage in projects and learn by putting them into practice. Yeah. So I've kind of put as a general summary. So what I think Fatima said. So task-based learning you would normally do within the space of one lesson, whereas project-based learning would normally take place over a period of time, over several lessons, and depending on your context and how often you have lessons, that might vary, but certainly more than one lesson. Task-based learning, I've put that language is focused on either before or after the task, so depending on whether you do that weak or strong task-based learning, whereas project-based learning, I think you can weave it in because you're doing it for a longer period of time. You can weave the language learning into the period of doing the project, so you don't need to kind of do them separately, you can kind of put them together. Task-based learning, so obviously the task as a cumulative outcome. But sometimes in task-based learning, that could be something just like having a discussion. That's fine as an outcome. Whereas in project-based learning, it's something more concrete, something that is presented, something that is shared, something that is, you have something more kind of solid, I suppose, to show for what you're doing. However, a lot of the principles that we would think about when we do task-based learning, I think, can be applied in a similar way to project-based learning. So I think it's a good idea to think of it as being a big brother or a big sister to it, and use some of those ideas. So why use project-based learning for lower secondary? So first of all, I think it's motivating. Students like that idea of doing a project. They like having something, that concrete thing that they end up in. It promotes independence. So I think at lower secondary level, we're definitely trying to get our students to be more independent, to take more responsibility for their work. And also they want that independence. They don't need their hand holding. They want to be able to exert themselves a little bit more. So I think that's this is a really good way of doing that. Also it can be individualized. So students have a degree of freedom about what direction they can take projects in. They can focus on what they're interested in, rather than being kind of dictated to and told what they're going to be doing. They can have that input and that collaboration, which I think is really nice for this level as well, when they are wanting to be treated more, starting to be treated more grown up. It obviously also promotes what we call either global or 21st century skills. So things like critical and creative thinking. Digital literacy is a big one, so that is, a really good thing to integrate into project-based learning. Media literacy, collaboration, problem solving, all of those kind of things that we as educators are told to focus on these days. It integrates the different skills, so we get to have writing and listening and all sorts of things going on a project. As well as the 21st century skills that I was mentioning. And it also encourages peer-to-peer collaboration and feedback. It gets them used to working together in a group. It gets them used to sharing ideas. It gets them used to giving feedback to each other, which are all things that are going to be really important as they go through their education systems. They're going to need to do that more and more. So it's a really nice way to start them on that path. However, it does sometimes have its challenges, and I think with young learners, as a teacher, we always kind of have these three kind of pressures coming towards us as a teacher, which is what the learners want, so what they're interested in doing or what they want to do, what the institution that you work for, whether that's a school or a private language college or wherever else you're working, what they expect you to cover. So often there's curriculum, there's syllabuses, or there's exams that need to be taken, and there's things that need to be covered. And also what the parents expect. So especially I think in private language schools where they might be paying a lot of money for lessons, the parents kind of want to see that they're getting some value. So sometimes I think with projects, if the student comes home and they say, oh, what did you do in class? Oh, I made a poster. Perhaps the parents might be a bit worried that they're not really learning like they should. So we need to negotiate these things at some point, in some, and in different contexts. Obviously, these pressures will relate slightly differently. So some of the other challenges and sort of reasons I've heard why teachers perhaps struggle sometimes with project-based learning is sometimes they're worried when they're working in groups and things that they're not using English. And again, this would depend upon the level of your students. Obviously, the outcome of the project is going to be in English. So depending on your classroom culture as well, I think if they're sometimes working in their L1 to complete a project, as long as their project at the end is in English, you as a teacher need to decide how much of an issue that is and how much you want to worry about that. Finishing projects at different times. I've definitely had this in the past with things where one group will finish and the other group's barely started. But I'm going to talk in a moment about sort of having a framework which helps to make sure that everybody's kind of working at the similar sort of speed. Students aren't interested in the same things. Again, I think that's fine. You can kind of try and group students together that are interested in similar things. And also sometimes, I think projects don't always have to be entirely a group project. Sometimes you can have an individual project which you come together at the end, sort of pull together as a group at the end, but it doesn't need to be working as a group all the way through. So sometimes that can help with that as well. Group members not pulling their weight, so some people doing all of the work. So again, I'm going to look at this in a moment, just you know, being really strong about assigning roles and responsibilities. How to use for assessment purposes, which I will talk about again as well, and also maintaining motivation and interest over multiple lessons, which I think, again, when I look at the next slide, we'll talk about the framework. But if you have a clear structure and you're not just spending every lesson completely working on a project, but you're breaking it up with other bits of language work, then that can really help, and other skills work as well. So I apologise for this slide, and I was trying to write this in the most clear way, and I'm not sure I succeeded, but it was the best I could do. But I'm going to talk you through it. So I've kind of developed a bit of a framework for teaching, for using PBL at lower secondary. So we can see on one side we've got what the teachers do, and on the other side what the learners do, and some of these things we're kind of doing together. So the things that are in the kind of purpley blue, darker colour is things we do together. The teacher's kind of input is the lighter purple, and the turquoise is what the learners are doing. So the first thing is obviously to decide upon a project. So in your situation, it will depend on whether that's a completely free choice of project or whether you as the teacher come in with a general topic. So for example, there might be in the curriculum that you need to practice, or you need to teach the students about imperatives. So you might think, okay, we'll do recipes, which is a clear thing. But then how do you present that? So you might want to negotiate and collaborate with your class to decide, are you going to make a recipe book? Are you going to make a series of videos about cooking instructions? Are you going to do a live cooking if you have the resources to do so, or some sort of tasting? So you need to make that decision together, and I think it's nice to include students in this kind of process, and it helps give them ownership over the project. Then as the teacher, you need to provide some kind of model. So you need to look at cooking videos on YouTube, or a recipe book of traditional recipes. You might, if you're from another culture, you might want to share some recipes from your culture. Perhaps show them examples that other students have done previously, to give them some ideas and something to kind of aspire to. And that can be quite motivating, because I find, you know, at this lower secondary level, it can be quite competitive. And if you show them what other students have done, they kind of want to do something better. So if you have, once you've done a project a couple of times, it's nice to keep those good examples to show to the students, I think, so they can see what they're supposed to do. Then I think you need to go through the steps to complete a project. And again, I think you can do this together. Decide, you know, what do you need to do? This is what the outcome is. This is what we want to achieve. How are we going to get there? What steps do we need to do? The really practical steps. So we need to find photos, or we need to research. So I think you can work on this together, but I would also, after that, perhaps write it up or type it up so that they've got a copy, so they can use it like a checklist, and they can see, okay, this is what we've done, and you can say to them, okay, what have you done? What do you need to do? So it's good to kind of, you know, maybe just take a photo of it, write it on the board and take a photo and share that with them somehow. So then I spoke before about using it for assessment. I think you can use project work for assessment. I think you need to be clear about how you do that and what you're assessing them on. So whether it's what language work you're going to focus on, that's what you want to be assessing them on, how they work in a group, their final, you know, this, not just what they produce finally, but actually how they worked along the steps, would be a really, really nice way of doing that. I can talk about that more, but I don't have time today. But yeah, you can use it for assessment, I think, if you come up with a clear rubric. And I would always share that early with the students so that if you need to assess it, they know what they're doing. Obviously, not in every context you're going to need to assess this, but just I know some people do need to have ongoing assessments. So then the students would work together to brainstorm, to do planning, to work out who's going to do what. And so make sure you're clear on that. You know, you need to make sure that not everybody is doing the same thing. And also just make sure that you play to people's strengths. So if somebody's really good at filming things, then they can be the director. If somebody's really good at art, they can be the art director, graphic designer. So you can work out what people are interested in doing if they're working in a group. So then if we see where it says on the teacher's side, it says vocab input. So there's something, so for example, if we were doing the recipes idea I mentioned, you would know that they would need perhaps verbs for cooking. So you could do that kind of early on. You could look at some verbs for cooking. So you could do that with the sort of brainstorming, planning stage. Or you could, or I suppose, so you could do that first. But when they start doing the project, you might discover that there's some other things that they need help with. And so therefore, you could do that later. After you've kind of seen a first draft, there might be something obvious that comes up that you think, okay, we need some more support. So I think that the vocab and the language input, you can either do that early on if it's things that you can anticipate they're going to definitely need, or you can wait and see what comes up and what they need extra help with, or sometimes you can do both, and I think that's fine. So in the class, I think you should be asking to see their drafts. You should be constantly checking. So you should be providing models, you should be providing language input, you should be providing vocab input, and also checking what they're doing, so that you can see what extra support they need. So I think with projects, it's not a case of sort of sending them away to do it and bringing in the final product. You need to be helping them through that process, and especially at lower secondary where they do need that extra support. And also the sort of skills input that perhaps later on we can take a little bit more for granted. At this level, they do need help. They need help researching. They need help finding how to find good sources to use for research. They might need help making PowerPoint presentations. They might need help just structuring a paragraph. Those sort of basic skills work. Even things like pronunciation you might want to do at this stage, that everything that you do, you should be relating back to the project. How can you use this in your project? How is this going to help you? So that they can see a real value in what they're doing. And I think it helps to make the language alive for them, because they can see that it's going to have an outcome. So rather than you're just studying imperatives because that's what's on the curriculum, okay, no, you're studying imperatives because you're going to use this when you're giving your instructions in your recipes, for example. And then obviously the final presentation, however that might be. It might be a video, it might be a written presentation, it might be some sort of written presentation, or it might be a poster, it could be an oral presentation, it could be a debate, it could be, you know, there's a whole range of different ideas of projects you can do. And then after that, obviously working together for some feedback, some reflection, peer feedback, talk about which ones were the most successful projects and why, how you thought your performance was, etc., etc. So I'm just going to go through, I've got an example of a project. So this project I called Green Your School. And this is a really nice, because it's a really practical project that they can actually see sort of real life results with, I suppose. So the idea of this is that they look at their school, and they try and find ways, or one particular way, they choose one particular way to make it more environmentally friendly. So that might be using less cups in the cafe or the cafeteria, or using less paper, or recycling. So they look at the school and they try and decide of one really good thing that they could do about the school. Okay, and then obviously once they've done this, we can hopefully work together with the school to put it into practice, and then they get to see that this project has a real result. Okay, so I've kind of gone through the steps that I would do. So first of all, you would decide on the outcome of the project. So do they want to do an oral presentation? Do they want to do it as a poster? Do they want to make a video? You can work on that together depending on your resources and their interests. And then I've suggested that you can maybe look at, there's a really fabulous school in Bali called the Green School, which is really focused on environmental issues, and it's kind of like the really extreme example, I suppose, of what you could do, but it just helped to inspire them and give them some ideas. So there's, if you search online for Green School Bali, there's some really nice BBC videos and YouTube videos and sort of promotional videos for them that you could maybe look at. Then if it's applicable, you would talk about the assessment. And then you might look at vocabulary to do with the environment. So you might look at things like reduce, reuse, recycle, those kind of words that are quite, you see quite a lot to do with environmental issues. And then you might put them into groups, and they might brainstorm some ideas about what they could do with the school, how they could make it a better school and more environmentally friendly. Then we would look at planning, how are they going to complete it, assign roles, who's going to do what. And then we might do some language work. So we might look at modals for giving advice and suggestions. So I think we should do this. We must improve our recycling. We have to cut down on our food waste or whatever. So we're using some modals that they can use for their project. And then research, so look at other schools. There's also some opportunities for some sort of CLIL work. So you might want to, if you've got students that are interested and good at maths, they might want to look at, how many sheets of paper you could save by photocopying on both sides, or how much carbon you might save, and do a bit of this kind of work, which helps on the students that are interested in sort of science and maths. You can get them to do those sorts of things. And then obviously drafting and editing, and all the time the teachers monitoring and helping to give feedback on what they can improve. And then maybe some skills input. So if they were going to do it as an oral presentation, you might do presentation skills, for example. And then you would get them to present their ideas. And a nice thing is that if you could get someone else from the school, so like like the maintenance manager or the principal, to come in and watch the presentations and maybe decide on which ideas they think would be good ones to implement at the school. And then it's really motivating for them if you can find sort of an outside audience that's not just their classroom to share it with. And then obviously the feedback and reflection stage. So that's just one sort of example of how I would stage a project like this. Weaving in the sort of language work, weaving in the vocabulary, and helping to monitor all the time exactly how the project is going. Okay, I've got time for one. I'm just going to skip over this one quite quickly because I'm aware of time ticking on. But this is another one. So this is so I mentioned before that I think not all projects need to be totally group projects. So this is an idea of a project that would be done more as an individual project. So this is the idea of telling a story. So you might look at some examples of stories, short stories, fables, graphic novels. Oral storytelling is really nice as well. Talking about stories, what types of stories your students are interested in, traditional stories perhaps. And then you would think about outcomes. How do they want to present it? So do they want to make, there's actually really nice free software that you can do where you can make like online flip books, so you can like collate them all together into one of those online books, which is really easy to do and looks really nice, and you can kind of share with all the students, so that's nice as well. So you might want to do something like that, or you might just want to make posters, or you might want to make a physical printed, photocopy them and make a physical printed book. Again, you might want to look at the assessment rubric if that's appropriate. And then there's some look at the features of stories, so descriptions, tense, what sort of tenses do we use? You might want to talk about writing in the first person or third person, what the differences might be on those sorts of things. And then you might want to work in groups to brainstorm some ideas. You might want to give them some story prompts. So as a little plug, I used to write a blog about using creative writing in ELT, and I'll give the website at the end, but I've got a whole page on there of all different story prompts for story writing, different ideas, music and pictures and things like that. I'll share that at the end. And then you would get them to produce a first draft of the story. You might want to do some peer feedback. You might want to look at the story, give some feedback, looking at things like adjectives and adverbs. And actually, once you've looked at a first draft, you might get some really good ideas about things that they need to work on, things that they need to improve. And then redrafting. So again, individually, in pairs. Final draft, and it's actually a really good exercise for just getting students to redraft, which I think is something that students find really, really difficult to do. And actually, I'm a writer and I find it difficult to do, so it's a good skill. And then collate the stories and share them in some way, and then present them and share them in however way you've decided. And again, reflection. So again, it's just weaving it in. This is more of an individual kind of project, but also you can see, even though it is an individual and they're producing individual stories or poems or oral storytelling, we are still allowing them to collaborate together and give each other feedback and give each other ideas. And also another sort of skills thing you might want to do is how to give constructive feedback, which is often something that they can struggle with, like what to give feedback about and how to give feedback in a way that's not going to upset anybody. Is a nice way to do it. So I'm just going to nip through my conclusion of one. I could talk about this all day, but I'm aware I've only got half an hour. So projects can include meaningful and targeted language practice. So I don't think projects have to just be a supplementary thing. I think that you can really use them to target language and also show students how this language can be used in a useful way and give them a real purpose for using them. I think that you need to have a range of projects to cater to different students. So some students might really like talking, others won't. Some students might like writing, others won't. So I think that you just need to be wary that you're not sort of repeating the same things, and try and just make it as varied as possible if you are going to be doing project work. I've also put lower secondary learners need a clear framework and to be guided through steps to complete projects. So I think that that's important. Doing project work isn't an excuse for the teacher just to relax. It is hard work. Once you've done the project a couple of times, it gets easier because you have resources that you've used. But it's so motivating for students, and they're so proud of having that really concrete outcome that I think it's really worthwhile. But you do need to guide them through, and especially at the lower secondary level, they do need that help so that they can complete it successfully. Also, skills work, like I said, needs to be emphasised at this level. They might not have those basic skills that we would perhaps take for granted a bit at later levels, about how to create presentations, etc. And also to include them, so to collaborate, so that you design projects together. And just as a final thought, so I wanted to say that project-based learning is ideal for secondary students who want to express their individuality and growing independence. So it's a really nice way of giving them a bit more freedom and letting them be more involved in their learning, but at the same time really helping them to get some meaningful language practice. So thank you very much. There's my email. That's my website that I mentioned that has got lots of story prompts on and creative writing ideas if you're interested, and my Facebook page that I also share creative writing ideas on. And I'm not sure we have time for questions, but I might have time for a quick one.
Thank you very much, Joe. We have 1 minute for questions. So I don't know if there is one question about an app for sharing stories.
Yeah, there's not really an app, but if you look online, there was one I've used, but I can't remember the name. But if you just search online for free, I think if you search for like free flipbook maker or something like that, or yeah, that's what they're called, isn't it? Flipbooks, I think. That there's a few different ones out there that you can find quite easily. That will make the like the online flipbooks that look really nice, look professional.
Okay, thank you very much, Joe, for your presentation, for these practical ideas on how to address project-based learning in the classroom. and all the benefits it could bring to
My pleasure.
to the development of language and also the diversity and needs for each context.
Brilliant. My pleasure. Thank you very much.
We will be back in 5 minutes after the break with our